Right, so you were watching the live coverage of Prime Minister Modi's talks with President Putin in Sochi. Prime Minister Modi describing Russia as India's oldest friend, describing about the unbreakable friendship between the two countries, how the ties are time-tested, and that they've opened a new chapter in bilateral ties. And Prime Minister Modi going on to invoke Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and President Putin when they met for the first India-Russia Strategic Partnership Summit in the year 2000, which, according to Prime Minister Modi, saw the seeds of the special and privileged strategic partnership that we see between India and Russia today.
And this year, for the first several months, we have also...
All right, joining me live from the WION newsroom studio is Ambassador Arun K. Singh. Ambassador Singh, thank you and good to have you again on WION.
Thank you.
Now, there we heard Prime Minister Modi made repeated references to Atal Bihari Vajpayee and the 2000 summit, the first between India and Russia. What's the significance of those comments there?
So 2000 was a very significant year. It was not the first but the second visit from Russia to India after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but the first visit by President Putin.
Right.
And it was important because President Putin had taken over in 2000, and in the first year of his presidency, he made a visit to India. Before that, a lot of uncertainty had been created in the India-Russia relationship after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Because after that, the new Russia had focused on its relations with the West. There was a sense that the Western economic and political system had emerged the victor in the Cold War, and that perhaps Russia should go down the path of that system. And Russia had focused a lot on consolidating relations with the West. And some of its traditional partners, like India and others, did not receive the same level of attention. Defense cooperation had suffered, cooperation in the area of space and other areas had also suffered. You may recall that President Yeltsin had visited India in 1993 after several postponements. In fact, his Vice President Rutskov had made a visit to Pakistan in 1992 before Yeltsin came to India. And there was a lot of concern here at that time. So Putin coming to India in 2000 and the two countries signed a declaration on strategic partnership at that time was a signal that Russia was re-evaluating its post-Soviet relationships, was giving more attention to some of its traditional partners, traditional forms of relationship, and a kind of reassurance to countries like India. So that's why it is very significant. And it was since then that the practice of annual summits between India and Russia was started. And it's been 18 years and we've had 18 summits, which means it is being held. And then starting from 2000, in 2010, the two countries moved from a strategic partnership to a special and privileged strategic partnership, signaling that there's something very particular about this relationship. And it is derived partly from the confidence in defense cooperation we have. Even today, more than 60% of our inventory is of defense inventories of Russian origin. The levels of technology we get from Russia in the area of defense, and the consistent political support that we have received from Russia in areas that are of critical importance for us. So that is what has given some confidence to the
And talking about what the two principals might be discussing in Sochi as we speak, in terms of bilateral, regional and global issues, what might be some of those issues according to you?
As you saw, the spokesman of the Ministry of External Affairs had earlier said that, one, it is an informal summit. So they're not going to get down onto the more nitty-gritty detail issues. Those would be discussed when President Putin comes to India later in the year for the annual summit. So here they will be looking at issues in the broader and longer-term perspective. And that becomes critical because the global situation is in a lot of flux. The way the US is defining its relations with other countries in the world, its positions on different issues is changing. Relations between US and Europe are changing. Europe is looking at Russia differently. Chancellor Merkel visited Russia and met President Putin at Sochi on the 18th of May. President Macron is coming to Russia on the 25th and 26th of May. He'll be at St. Petersburg for the International Economic Forum where the Prime Minister had gone last year. Relations between Russia and China are changing. Prime Minister made an informal visit to China. So in the context of all that, I think they need to discuss that with this flux in the global situation, how do we see the India-Russia relationship going ahead, maintaining the bilateral aspects, and how do we maneuver in the regional and global context. We also have some concerns related to how Russia has been approaching Pakistan. Traditionally, Russia has not supplied military equipment to Pakistan, but now they have offered them helicopters. Because as India is widening its options consolidating relations with US, with Europe, Japan. Russia is also widening its options with China, Pakistan and other countries. So given this, how do we maneuver our way forward? Also, Russia has become more engaged with and dependent on China because its relations with US and Europe have come under some challenge. So we want to understand what does it mean going forward. And then Iran. US has walked away from the Iran nuclear deal. Transactions with Iran starting August and then from November will come under sanctions. I saw the Prime Minister had mentioned the North-South corridor. That is the link from India to Russia via Iran. Right. So projects like that would come under challenge. The Chabahar port that we are building in Iran. So those issues would also need to be discussed. Plus the situation in West Asia, in Syria. What does it mean in terms of stability in the region? We have 8 million Indians living and working there. Almost $50 billion worth of remittances from that part of the world. So stability in that part of the world is very critical for us. So stability in the region, challenges related to terrorism. So I'm sure all these are issues that would be discussed given the global flux and ferment that is happening.
Ambassador Singh, how much of a worry do you think are the American sanctions on Russian entities which may be supplying defense items to India? Now, how does India choose to think of insulating our defense ties with Russia to minimize the impact of the American sanctions there?
I would say that Russia is a critical defense partner for us. As I mentioned, more than 60% of our defense inventory is from Russia. Right. In many areas, the levels of technology that we've got from Russia has not been available elsewhere. Like the BrahMos missile is one such example. We've had in the past leased nuclear-powered submarines from Russia, and there have been other such very, very critical projects. So we have no option but to continue our defense partnership with Russia. This is India's sovereign decision making. It is in our sovereign national security interest. And one would expect that the lawmakers in the US and decision makers in the US would understand this and not take issues to the point where they want to sanction India for any kind of a defense cooperation with Russia, because that would certainly not be acceptable in India. And I can see that people in the US administration realize that. Defense Secretary Mattis, in a hearing before Congress, had advocated that the Congress should give waiver to the administration so that in their own national security interest they can waive imposition of sanctions. The problem is that under present US law, no such waiver provision is there. And that is more because of their internal requirement, because the Congress wanted to tie down the hands of President Trump related to Russia. But that's an internal problem. They need to fix that. And if they want to look at their relationship with India in a longer term, they need to ensure that no such sanction is imposed. Otherwise, people in India would look at US as not a reliable partner in a medium and longer term perspective. So it's in their own interest. But we'll have to see how it evolves.
And talking about the two principals, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, now we know that Prime Minister Modi invests a great deal of time, energy, effort into building a personal rapport with world leaders, be it Donald Trump, be it Xi Jinping, be it Macron in France or Theresa May in the UK. How would you describe Prime Minister Modi and President Putin? Can these two men work together in the immediate future?
So I think personal relationships are important, as we have found that there are situations where at the official level, bureaucratic level, where people operate on the basis of existing norms and rules, things can get stuck. And at those situations, the leaders need to step in and give guidance. Many people had pointed out that in the context of Doklam, the situation started getting resolved after Prime Minister Modi and President Xi had a brief conversation at one of the multilateral events. So engagement between the leaders is very important, and President Putin has a lot of authority in Russia. Given the level of our engagement with Russia, it is important that when things run into any bottlenecks at the bureaucratic and official levels, those are released. And for that understanding among the leaders. Also, you would have noticed that our Prime Minister had visited Chancellor Merkel in April, soon after she had been re-elected. He had visited President Macron in France in June last year, soon after he had been elected as president. Therefore, he is reaching out to leaders in their new terms or first terms to establish a new equation. So I think this would be also part of the effort.
And very quickly, Ambassador Singh, how would you compare or contrast the two informal summits, the Wuhan summit with President Xi and the Sochi summit with President Putin?
There would be similarities and there would be differences. The similarity would be that both were described as discussing issues in a broad, long-term perspective. In the context of China, the aim was to set a new tone for the relationship, move away from the tone of adversarial relationship, so that after that, lower down the line, when officials are discussing, they're looking at issues in a different perspective. In the context of Russia, we don't have an adversarial tone in the relationship, but there are some challenges in the relationship that we discuss, both in the bilateral, regional and global context. Sure. So I think the importance here would be to establish or to signal to everyone that we have a lot of confidence in this relationship. Right. Based on that, we will take it forward.
Sure. On that note, Ambassador Singh, thank you so much for joining me on the discussion. Appreciate it.